I think that it really sort of came to a head when my parents separated when I was about 10 years old. My dad suffers from alcoholism. That's been intergenerational.
Probably my struggles started about when I was 14 and I stopped eating. I had anorexia for quite a period and following that I developed bulimia, which has been a lifelong struggle.
We seem to have an epidemic of mental health issues at the moment, and the current solutions don't seem to be enough. It seems like there's a piece of the puzzle missing.
Out of the day, I probably spend about 5 hours of non-stop cleaning. So when I walk into the room and the kids have been playing and there's stuff everywhere, I get really anxious. My heart starts racing. I can't deal with the chaos of it all.
What hit me was the death of my cousin who committed suicide. And it just put me into a downward spiral.
I guess I think back to what's happened with my husband, or I think about my life now and how I'm really alone. And I also think about his struggle as well and how he's not here anymore. He took his life.
So at the second half of the 20th century, there was a great emphasis in psychology on pathology. Can we understand the disorders of the human mind? What happened, though, was that the field began to focus almost exclusively on those questions, leaving out a number of other questions around not just how can the human mind become disordered, but how can it be ordered? How can it be well ordered? What are things that can go well with us as human beings?
What's the nature of having a good life? How do we be good people? If you look around the world, it's clear that there are still struggles, and we still haven't figured out what we're supposed to do about life.
And with all that we know now about the science of happiness and well-being, could we offer this to people experiencing struggle, regardless of where they are on a mental health continuum?
It's an escape to reality, to the broader picture of what's going on in the world. Because what can happen when we focus exclusively on our problems is that we think that that's all there is in the world.
I have such enormous passion and compassion when I see people who are struggling and experiencing vulnerability. I'd love to be able to shift the dial for every one of these 12 people. We've seen some early success, but it's really daunting taking a group of strangers with complex mental health challenges and asking whether the science will help them learn how to thrive.
Welcome to Impactology Live. The trailer we've just seen is from an upcoming documentary, How to Thrive. And as part of Impactology Live, Rhea and I were obviously going to incorporate the topic of mental health in this event. And we have discussed it with other presentations. But when we discovered this particular trailer, we felt compelled to actually discuss the topic of mental health, but use this documentary as the backdrop, as the backstory. And why? What we're doing to address mental health in our community needs a rethink. What we're doing at the moment is not working. And it's our great pleasure to welcome the director of How to Thrive, Duy Huynh, and positive psychology therapist, McLeod, who's also featured in the documentary, which we just seen in the trailer. Dee and Marie, welcome. How are you both?
Really well. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Look, we're really pleased that you can join us today. And when we initially reached out to you to discuss the concept of Impactology Live, the more research we did into how you've brought this documentary together and the work that you're doing even now as you're working through completing this documentary, which will get a bit more insight from you in this conversation. We just felt it was just such a unique and different way to look at a problem statement that I feel hasn't changed for many, many years. So just wanted to say thank you for joining us today.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Dee, as a director and producer, this is obviously quite a powerful piece of cinema. Can you share with us the inspiration to the How to Thrive documentary? What's your story and why the focus on mental health?
Yeah, so I guess struggle has been an underlying theme of my life, and I guess a lot of us can relate to having some level of adversity in our lives. So my story is that I came from a refugee background, born into fairly intense poverty in my own lifetime. Escaped by boat at 4 years old, endured the raids and attacks at sea, herded into refugee camps, and adapting to being in a new land, this new land, Australia. So this idea of impermanence and resilience has always been, I guess, hardwired by necessity into my life trajectory. So for many of my contemporaries, turning to drugs and dealing heroin, it was a way of coping with their mental health struggle. And by luck or chance, I didn't suffer the same fate. So I'd always wondered, what was it that separated those of us who can undergo adversity and trauma and bounce back, and those of us who, for whom mental health continues to be a struggle? And is there a secret formula that works? What is that secret formula to resilience and happiness? And if there is a secret formula, maybe that's something that we all need to get a little bit of and learn from. And maybe there is a way to learn how to thrive.
And Dee, was that something that that sort of emerged over time for you in terms of the idea for this documentary, or was it something that sort of you said, you know what, now's the time?
It's an underlying question that I've always had in the back of my mind, and I was the kid that people often went to when they were struggling for some strange reason, and I never felt like I was equipped or had the answers. I just seemed to be the one that had a slightly more optimistic outlook, I guess. And so 5 years ago, I sort of more solidly did. I read the research papers. I looked at the research in this area and the practical applications, and thought, hey, this is this incredible work here that perhaps is underutilized, and we need to shine some light on it. Yeah.
Marie, you are the protagonist in this documentary, minus the cape. Can you share with us how you got involved with the How to Thrive project, and why did this project appeal to you specifically?
Thanks, George. So actually it came about very synchronistically. I think, sometimes when you're clear about your purpose and you have this alignment, and, we sort of often talk about it as a team and say how many amazing coincidences and things came together to make this happen. It started for me having a coaching client, Dylan, who was keen to be a filmmaker. And I had met Dee at the World Positive Psychology Conference and had a little bit of an exchange with him and taken his card away. And it was really out of kindness and a courageous thing for me to call up Dee and ask whether he had any interest in taking on an apprentice who was still my coaching client. And it was through that connection that Dee then learned about the work that I was doing at the time with young people experiencing mental health issues. And I'd been doing that as well through community health centres. And as Dee and I got talking and I understood what he was doing and he understood more what I was doing, that he came along and listened to the young people that I'd been working with, and I guess began to feel compelled that this was part of the story. And so as synchronicity would have it, Dylan and I are now part of the team that is How to Thrive. And for me, what that meant was that the work that I'd been doing that was almost sort of underground, I suppose, and could never really get funded, but we were having this sort of movement starting of people saying to us that they'd been receiving sort of more traditional mental health services for a long time and not able to see much movement in their in their struggle, and then, you know, that we started to see people really change, and then they were really urging me to do more, and I didn't really have the capacity to do that. So I sort of had the way, or maybe the tiny bit of the way, but I didn't have the sway. And so for me, the meeting of the minds, I guess, is what we're hoping.
And finding Marie was the personification of, I guess, the person who's doing this work that puts together all the pieces, you know, because you can't make a documentary just about the science. You've got to have the story underpinning characters, and Marie's work is just incredible. My jaw dropped when I interviewed some of the people who she'd worked with, who had years and years of struggle, mental health struggle. They've been through every single intervention, you know, including, you know, very extreme, you know, psychological stuff, and it didn't work. And this was the thing that made the difference. And so, whilst we're not saying this is the black box that's going to fix everyone. It's there is something here, you know, and there is something beyond talk therapy and pills, you know. Yeah.
Well, we think it's worth exploring more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and chatting to you both, and again seeing the trailer a number of times, and also reading the information about the documentary, what you're trying to achieve with this is obviously trying to shift the narrative, and it's not only about how people perceive mental health and the stigma behind that, but also what is appropriate action as well. So, Marie, your path and inspiration, specialising in positive psychology. Can you share with us how you came to where you are at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I can, from as long as I can remember, quite a young child, it mattered to me to make positive impact, particularly when I saw people in struggle. So that's been kind of a long time purpose and passion of mine. But I started out in social work. That was kind of the natural path that was known to me at the time. And I did child protection for a long time in New Zealand and the UK. And then I came to Australia and I worked with 21 impoverished communities around the state of Victoria. And obviously that really was a lot of focus on dysfunction and how do we fix it and how do we work with people to fix it. And then I became a parent. And I had 3 kids in 2 years. I had twins and another one very quickly. One of my sons has autism. All 3 of them have ADHD. And it's fair to say that I unravelled in the, you know, like it's fine to be able to do all those things professionally. And so then we were part of the dysfunction, and we were going to services and in that model that I had been part of. And I guess you might call me a slow learner, but I just felt like that wasn't working, and there must be something else. I read Martin Seligman's book Flourish over an Easter weekend, and I said to my husband, this will change me personally and professionally. This is very important. And then again, in a moment of synchronicity, McLeod, who's one of the world experts in this space, and she was travelling to the US at that time to study with Seligman, happened to be a parent in my son's kinder, and we put our heads together, and I started to kind of learn and play first in my own family and then work, and then sort of testing it outwards and seeing what might be the sort of boundaries of how far could we push this sort of different lens. All it is just a flick of the switch to begin to say, what happens if we look at what's right with people and their strengths and their passion and their purpose rather than what's wrong with people? And that had me completely captivated, and that's been part of how I've practiced ever since.
It sounds like there's a recurring theme of stars aligning between the two of you and the project and the individuals that are coming into your life. Dee, before I ask this question, I do want to highlight that at the end of this chat, but also ongoing in terms of our website and chat function, we want individuals, because this project is still underway, and funding as well is quite important to get the project completed. So I just wanted to highlight, so when everyone is listening to this, is also to be front of mind that if you're in a position to contribute to completing this documentary, that there will be an opportunity. So, Dee, with that sort of background there, what phase is the project at?
So we've been through development of the film, and we've raised enough money to begin the intervention. So we began with a retreat out in a retreat centre out in Geelong, and we watched our participants through that. When we came out of that retreat, we were in a global pandemic. There were no phones out in the retreat, and when we came back, and so we felt, we felt like we needed to hold these people and keep them, through this pandemic, and through that process, being able to watch how people have interacted with these interventions. Of course, you can't make a feature film using Zoom and diary cam. But what it has been able to do is it's given us a really unique opportunity to observe each character's story and transformation in a way that perhaps you don't get a chance to do when you're making documentary. You're in the mess of it all usually. But what we're able to do is, with the hindsight of seeing these characters' development, we can now go back and conduct filming in a much more creative and considered way than we would have if we were just covering what's happening. And so the next phase now is raising the rest of the funds to complete the production. We know, we have the characters, we know their stories, and we've mapped out the trajectory, and it's a really wonderful, a wonderful experience, and beautiful people and stories that inform, that give us a way of talking about the science.
Marie, in terms of the project, How to Thrive, we hear the word thrive a lot, particularly through the course of 2020 with what we've all experienced, but even prior to that, we generally hear it, thrive and survive. In the context of this project, how do you define thrive?
So I guess it's important to distinguish thrive from happiness in a sense, and I think these words do get thrown around an awful lot. And I think that the difference for me is that when we talk about happiness, it's an emotion and it can rise and fall very quickly. Within sort of 30 seconds, we can have a moment of joy and then it can be gone. Whereas thriving for me is having a more consistent sense of feeling good and functioning well. And what we are particularly interested in is, can we equip people with some of the evidence-based ways that they can thrive more than just survive. So we have deliberately chosen people, some of them who are in very deep struggle, to test this notion. Could we help people to learn some strategies in the middle of that? And so that despite the struggle, that they could still live well. And so I guess depending when you're based on it, so we think about a continuum where, if we've got 0 to +10, 0 is I'm okay, +10 is I'm flourishing or thriving, and then below 0 to -10 is when we begin to get into struggle. But in my experience, if we take someone and they're a -5 or a -7 or whatever, and we get them to a -3, life looks much better. And if we can get that sort of greater degree of stability where people are feeling good and functioning well more often, then that's a good thing.
That's great.
Yeah. And to me, I think thriving is about sort of having a really, living your best life, I guess, or at least aiming towards, looking towards that. And living your best life is not about, as Marie saying, being happy all the time. It's actually about appreciating the full spectrum of emotions that we experience as humans, and also having a helpful lens with which to interpret those emotions as well. And you develop that by using some of the techniques and skills that we've learned from science. And the other thing I want to say there is that positive psych has had a fairly bad rap, and some of the criticisms are very justified, but there is this misunderstanding that it's about being positive, or
slap a smile on your face and you'll be fine.
It's actually not about that. It's actually about consciously creating,
your best life.
Yeah.
Despite whatever those circumstances are.
That's right. So we can learn to appreciate life's circumstances, the ups and the downs, and find a helpful way to form meaning around those occurrences. And in doing so, as Marie says, creating an experience of life where we're consistently feeling good and consistently functioning well.
It touches back actually to a keynote we heard this morning from Kirsten Ford-Jones. Kirsten got us and the audience actually to do an exercise where we had to pick the 5 emotions that we had felt over the course of the last 24 hours. And in that, then she took us through, what was positive and what would you constitute as positive and negative. And I guess the link back to what you've both said there is that thriving and more than surviving, and also that notion of happiness, if we feel that we always have to have that level or have it at a particular level, we're striving for the unattainable perhaps, because life is just not like that, and I think what Kirsten said this morning is that, you need as many, well, you don't need as many. So it's positive, it's good to have more positives than negatives, but you need the negatives to learn from them. And I think based on what you've both just said, it certainly highlights that balance that we need, and to not be trying to attain this unavoidable utopia that just simply does not exist, or not in real life anyway. So on the back of that, Dee, given the documentary, given what we've just talked about around, not wanting to attain that thing that is utopia, what makes your philosophy and approach, particularly with documentary, unique?
Well, yes. So we know that positive psychology is a 25-year-old sort of process, but even before positive psychology, Aristotle taught us about how happiness happens, and living a virtuous life is the pathway to happiness. And Seligman and I think James Wolski, who's in our trailer, began this positive psychology movement. So it's not new theories, but I think what's happened is that when we look at the science, there's a lot of science to draw from. Where the gap is in the application of that science, and in particular, in our particular circumstance, applying that science in situations where people are experiencing mental health struggle. So it turns out that, most of us, 50% of us, will have a mental health condition warranting treatment in our lifetime. And so mental health struggle is much more common than we all sort of, I think it is. And so it occurred to me when I was trawling through the research papers that it's such a shame that so much of this amazing research and work has happened, and they stay in these academic journals and they don't see the light of day, And so our goal here is just to make this research a bit more mainstream. And when we look at the applications of this science, we find that it really gets applied in the upper echelons of society, in corporates who can engage somebody like Marie to train their staff, in private schools where positive psychology or positive education has been implemented, in order to make people weller than well, and that's okay, and that's very important. But there's an application for this material when people have suboptimal mental health, and so this documentary is about bridging that gap.
And going beyond awareness. I think that's one of the other differentiators is there's been a lot of awareness raising, and that's also very important. But beyond that, how do we hopefully share with people what can they do? What are some practical things and small, simple things that people might be able to do to change their circumstances?
Yeah. So if you're going to ask your buddy, and we if you're going to ask your buddy, are you okay? and they say, actually, I'm not okay. What then? What then? And so this is really picking up on where does that conversation go, and how do we deeply explore the solutions that are available in answer to that question.
And I think, unfortunately, for many of us, so often we don't ask that really simple question. Sometimes we're scared of the response. Sometimes we might not feel equipped enough to be able to support that person. And I think you raise a really valid point. It's a very simple question. Sometimes it's not having the answer. It's about providing that person with the space to share how they are feeling, and then helping them perhaps get that support that they need. This is a question for both of you. Can you share with us the process when sourcing the 12 volunteers, and how you went about selecting the right people for the documentary?
Well, we sent out a casting notice on social media, and this was just on a very limited, our own personal social media and connections to people, and we had an overwhelming response.
It's kind of like scratch the surface, and just sort of, we actually said to ourselves, this will be interesting to see what appetite there is out there for something different and new. And we were not just offering people an alternative, we were asking them, would you go on camera with your struggles to get this? And we got so many people so quickly that it sort of again reinforced for us that this felt like we're on the right track. So we did do a casting call out like that, and then we sat down and kind of narrowed that down to a list of people who we had invited in for an audition. We auditioned people on camera. We were looking for particular things in terms of a range of struggles so that we could look across the sort of continuum of mental health. And I guess we were probably very brave about that. And maybe in hindsight, we might have been a little too brave. But, we've got people really fully on that continuum. Some of their struggle is very, very extreme. And we've really tested that and probably found our limits. When people have such things as extreme trauma and, then some instances of psychoses and multiple personality disorders and things like that, that's where we've kind of discovered that there's probably a limit. But we wanted to get a really good coverage of that. We wanted to see that people were stable enough, robust enough, motivated enough, engaging enough, because we need good storytellers. We have a clinical psychologist on board with us. He was really critical as well. We needed to know that people had in place mental health supports. The duty of care was very important to us, and we wanted people to really understand what they were in for here. And so that's the process pretty much, isn't it? Right. Yeah. And then we had a panel of people that helped us select the final 12, and that involved Dr. Peggy Kern from Melbourne University, our clinical psych and Headspace, and people with lived experience. So we really tried to be considered in that.
Dee Marie, you've both discussed the philosophy and idea behind the documentary. There's a alarming stat in the trailer that one person dies of suicide every 40 seconds. Where are we going wrong?
It's a big question. And with that kind of statistic, I would say that all of us have been impacted and asked ourselves that. In COVID, one of my son's 13-year-old friends took his own life. And, I'm someone that works in this space. And, when you have to tell your 13-year-old son that one of his friends jumped from a building and write a eulogy with him, you seriously ask that question. And so what I'm going to say now is not supposed to be the answer. But I suppose when I think about what I know and what I would want for my children as protective factors, the things that I think matters is that I would like to see that what we know and now, the enormous research that's gone into what helps people to be as well as they can, that would be taught in our schools along with reading, writing and maths. And I would like to see that, Professor Martin Seligman, who's the founder of this positive psychology, said, we can teach wellbeing, and in so doing, we may inoculate children and young people against depression, anxiety and suicide. So I would like to see that happening. I would like to see a cultural shift around normalising struggle. And I would like to see this kind of acknowledgement in our families and in our schools and communities and workplaces that said, permission to be human. Feel safe to say it's okay to not be okay. And along with that, sort of my third point is that we really need to encourage authenticity in our relationships. We need to really prioritise connection and the kind of deep, authentic connection rather than the superficial stuff that we sometimes get. And social media is not helpful. Social media is showing the kind of golden, glittery bits of our lives. And when we look at that in isolation, we think, my life doesn't look like that, and therefore there's something wrong with me. And so I noticed this with our participants in the documentary, is a lot of them have connections that are very superficial. A lot of them describe wearing masks and that their friends do not know at all about the struggle they experience. I think, and I've really worked hard with them to understand that we need a tribe, we need to belong, and in order to do that, we need to shed the layers and we need to test who's real, who's prepared to be raw. We need to ask for and accept help, and we need to find the people that let us do that. Having said all that, I do think that there are instances where we can't fix it. And so for any people listening who have had
people in their lives that have taken their lives. I don't want you to hear that it's always fixable. There is one particular person that we have in the documentary, and she has a big team of mental health practitioners around her, and she's had very good support from us, but she's still very suicidal at times. And so, I think we need to understand it within that context as well, that sometimes people have a very toxic mix of life experiences and chemicals. But having said that, we should remain hopeful and vigilant about what we can do.
I liked your analogy yesterday, Marie, when we were chatting about... You said, we teach kids how to swim before we throw them into the pool, and wellbeing is a bit like that, and good positive mental health practice is like that. It's, we're throwing kids into life and into these experiences or into social media without teaching them how to swim first, and we're wondering why they're drowning.
Well, in our current mental health system, we're dragging people out when they're drowning, and we would have liked to have caught them upstream and taught them to swim before it got to that point. I think that's part of understanding that we want to see positive psychology as both reactive and proactive, like in the education before something's gone wrong, but also we're challenging the notion to say, well, once something has gone wrong and people are in struggle, can it still help? Because positive psychology really mostly has been used in the realms of when people are already okay.
I absolutely think that if your son's friend had been given some of this information before, earlier, it would have made a really big difference. So.
Yeah.
Marie, I mean, that's just a devastating situation for the family and the community around that family as well. And the one thing that popped into my mind when you were sharing that story was that, it takes a village to raise a child. So if we're having gaps in the knowledge of A, what mental health is, and B, what it means to be suffering from mental health and where to get assistance, or if you're surrounded with individuals that you think you need support, from my experience, I feel that there are gaps in that safety net. And you mentioned rightfully the need for mental health training and education in schools. Can you just expand on that point there? Because obviously, if we're talking about what's missing in this complex puzzle, I just want to pick up on your point around schools and what you think will help schools better equip and ensure that kids thrive.
And I really want to be clear that a lot of work is happening in this space, and there are schools that are adopting positive education, and so there is a shift towards that, but it's for some of the people some of the time. And I would like to see that happening more uniformly, and that there would be a recognition that that's as important as the basics. And in actual fact, there's really good research that shows that, because the argument is if we focus on things like well-being, then we lose some of the academic. But the research shows that when we teach well-being, we can increase academic achievement by 16%. So there's not an argument that says it's an either-or. And so, there are curriculums that include these strategies for thriving, and that's happening. I suppose, in terms of what's missing, and this is, I'm sort of standing on the shoulders of giants when I say these things. There are many great people who have done the research, but this is about saying that the current model is looking to spot the dysfunction and the deficits and the disorder, and even in schools, like what's going wrong for people, and then jumping in those individual circumstances where things are not working, and what we want to start as having a culture both for individuals and for communities, and schools are a community, that says, what are our strengths? What are we good at? What do we love doing? What works well for us? And how for every single one of those children do we put them in the zone of their strengths more often? And what we observe is that when we can bring more light, the darkness fades away. And I know that sounds naff, as I'm saying it, but quite honestly, that field of appreciative inquiry where what we focus on grows. And so if we are in a school environment and we see that as a community, it's not just what are we teaching. Wellbeing has to be both taught and caught, right? And so we can teach it in the curriculum, but we also need to model it, and we need to have cultures where it is a felt experience of children and of staff and of a parent community.
Dr. Peggy Kern from Melbourne Uni, who's one of our research collaborators on this project, describes it. We teach kids PE, for example, physical education, because we know that physical health is important. Mental health is the same, and there are practices and activities around mental health that should be practiced on a regular basis in order to maintain mental health. And so we can liken it to going to the gym, where there is brain training around good mental health practice.
We need to have this continual restlessness around the topic of educating kids in schools, and you're absolutely right, Marie. There's so many schools out there, not only here in Australia but around the world, that have invested significant resources to be able to educate and support kids. It's how do we further enhance that? How do we just continue that restlessness, as I said, to make sure that where we are now is near enough is not good enough for a topic like this. And I feel a documentary like this will go a long way to changing the dialogue and the conversation amongst parents talking with each other, and hopefully parents with kids. That's what I think. My question to both of you is, what's your hope for this documentary, and what do you hope that people will do after watching this documentary differently?
So for me, I think there's a couple of layers to that. There's kind of the individual response, and then there's the system response. And so if we think about an audience of people who watch it, my hope is that if someone is watching it and they are experiencing struggle, that they can, or that they know someone who's experiencing struggle, that they can recognise themselves in one or more of our participants, and they can feel less alone, firstly, because they go, oh, it's not just me. And that's really powerful, that we have that sense of shared humanity. And then that they have a sense of hope. Like, to me, hope is massive. And when people have been sitting in struggle too long, they lose hope. And maybe when they've been interacting with the current system, they might have lost hope. And please don't get me wrong, I'm not against what's happening now. It's very, very important, but we would just like to see that there is also some other offerings. So I would like to see that there is hope, and then, we really want to engage people with good storytelling. We want to entertain them, but we want to educate them and inspire them to action. And so, like I said, it needs to be taught and caught. So it has to be able to be caught in small enough bites that people can go, I could give that a go. And then that, we need to follow that up with a really good impact campaign, that people can go to a website and they can engage with a community and a movement that maybe then gives them a next tool and a next strategy. So that's at the sort of individual level. At the systems level, and this is big for me, right? To be honest with you, this was the question that challenged me the most. Like, I feel so much humility and fear when I hear that. I'm like, how could we even dare to dream that? It feels very audacious, very, I don't know, but very sort of big and hairy, yeah. But I guess, in my wildest dreams, I would like to disrupt enough the system, just so that people would begin to think, to open the door and open their minds to, what if this was a piece of the puzzle? What if we looked at the other side of the coin and we didn't just pathologise, but we helped people to learn about well-being as opposed to ill-being? And so for me, the system side is saying, could we do things differently? What would that look like? And how could we make this more readily available to people, rather than your only option once you start to struggle is, you need to see someone. You go to your GP, you see a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and the offering is very much around diagnosing and seeing if we can fix that dysfunction. And we want to shift the narrative. That's for success for me. I'm not sure if you say something different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, normalizing struggle is really important, as an outcome. We all struggle, and there should be no shame in that whatsoever. We know that there's that wellbeing is a learned skill, and so if the more of us know that that's the case, the better. That we're developing this literacy around what wellbeing looks like, and having organisations, governments, individuals understand the benefits of that and take really focused action on their own wellbeing. We want to show that, you know, the more I look into this stuff, the more I think about what it is that's progressively missing in, you know, the experience of being humans. You know, we a lot of this stuff is about, you know, building belonging and being more engaged, and, you know, having accountability for your actions and compassion and optimism, and, you know, nurturing each other. And some of that stuff is, you know, it's not rocket science.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say,
it's,
isn't it? It's really...
It's what it is to be human, you know, and we've just kind of lost
our way a little.
Lost touch a little bit with that. And so hopefully this puts into kind of a framework, and in a storytelling way, really help people to connect. You know, we're not going to make change if people listen to the science and because
cognitively they hear it, but they need to be able to live it and have a little experience.
If they connect emotionally and pick out one little thing from the documentary and say, hey, I'm going to do that, that's a win for me. So, yeah.
And I think our characters' journeys have been inspiring. I think that they will tell the story in a way that it is really hopeful.
They're beautiful human beings, surprising and emotional and funny and
transformed, many of them.
All of them,
you know, that's despite, you know, not only COVID, but for a couple of our people, really, really other challenging things, like parents being diagnosed with terminal cancer, and, you know, 18-month-old children being in and out of hospital, and, you know, additional challenges. And have they slipped back, and are they sort of dealing with struggle again over and over? But are they dealing with that better than they would have before? I think they'd say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the system side, we're hoping that some of these approaches might find its way into a more collaborative approach between psychology, psychiatry, social work. Maybe we could all work together to help the person, you know, and offer this as a complementary approach. We're not saying stop taking your pills. That's absolutely necessary in some cases, but perhaps there's this much more humanistic and approach that connects us with being a kinder human being, that connects us with being more essentially who we already are as humans, you know.
That's I'm certainly looking forward to seeing the end product and the work that you've done with these 12 individuals. Just one final question from me. Dee, how can organisations or people contribute to the funding of this documentary?
Well, we've got a website at Documentary Australia Foundation, and all donations to that site are tax deductible. We do, you know, we would love you to get involved if you can, and please reach out and connect with us and ask any further questions. There's a website that Ash has got that we can post into the chat box for everybody.
Does that have a way for people to contact us?
Yes, so they can, absolutely contact people through Documentary Australia Foundation. And Maria and I can provide our contact details as well.
Yeah, really happy to hear from anyone with any questions or comments.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Dean Marie will be sure to put those details on our website. And I'd like to add in, if anyone's heard something that's troubled them through the conversation today, please feel free to contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or lifeline.org.au or wherever it may be in the city and country that you're living in. Dean Marie, I think the work that you are doing is absolutely extraordinary. It's bringing a conversation to light that I think, you know, what I've heard through this conversation is it's probably still a little bit underdone. Despite everyone's best intentions around mental health and supporting those that have a mental health issue, and that includes their families and friends that often struggle with it too. And from a personal perspective this year, what I did go and do for myself is I went and did the mental health first aid course, which is an online course here that was offered online here in Melbourne, but I'm sure it's offered all over the place. But I can't tell you how much that has helped me. I've been a HR professional for 22 years and have dealt with lots of different issues, but even still having completed that mental health first aid course, it taught me a lot more when I thought that I knew enough in this space. So I can't recommend that enough for anybody that's thinking, how can I support colleagues in the workplace or even family and friends that might be struggling?
Yeah, great.
Now to close, it's a customary close that we have with all our guests, and we'd like to extend that with you today. So I'll ask you the same question, and then we'll do a game of word association. So Dee, we'll start with you. If you were on a video call with your 18-year-old self, what advice would you provide to 18-year-old Dee?
Oh, tough. Be kind and trust your instincts.
Short and sharp. I like it. Marie, same question for you.
So I would say don't sweat the small stuff. Control what you can and let go of the rest. Be kind to yourself as you are to others. Be raw, be real, dream big, ask for help, hold hope. Be kind even when you don't feel like it. And remember that happiness is not found in the material stuff. And I guess, I always think of Winnie the Pooh, and this has been something that's had to kind of hold me through this experience is, kind of that we are braver than we believe, stronger than we seem, and smarter than we think. And I've sort of really struggled with that imposter syndrome, and this has been huge for me to be brave enough to do this. And so I think we need to keep reminding ourselves that we're as good as anyone, and we need to kind of lean in, especially when we are doing it with passion and purpose to make impact for others. It's not about me or Dee, it's about what this can do in the world. Impactology, right?
Yeah.
We like it. We like the sound of that. All right. Now, word association. So this one's for both of you. I'm going to say a word, and then if you could both, at different times, of course, maybe we'll start with you, Marie, first, and then Dee jump in. Just shout back the word. Well, don't shout it, but say back the word that comes to mind. So the first one, Marie, for you, mental health.
Emotional agility.
Same one for you, Dee, mental health.
Is a skill.
Adversity.
Resilience.
Is healthy.
Australian mental health system.
I'm going to say overloaded. Overloaded, maybe.
Needs work.
Thrive.
Flourish.
Thrive.
Oh, yeah, nice. Yeah.
Youth.
Zest, uninhibited.
Youth is fleeting.
Love.
Ooh, like for me, love is the driving force.
Love is puppies and
and love for me in this project's been learning to love champagne and Dee's cooking. And love for each other. Like we can do good work because there's so much goodwill in this project. So I think love is kind of a very important theme.
Absolutely.
Like I think it's been really risky, but we've put so much love into these people as well. And I'd like that to test the boundaries of what happens in terms of how we coach and how we work with people in struggle.
And finally, 2021.
2021 is our time to shine. The model we use in this work is called Beacon, so belonging, engagement, accountability, compassion, optimism, nurture. And it's about shining your brightest. And so for me, we've been through the sort of the stormy bit, we've been through the drought and the desert, and we're moving into what we can learn from that as kind of maybe in some instances post-traumatic growth. And so it's our time to shine.
I'm hoping that it's a new era for us.
Well, Dee Marie, thank you for joining us at Impactology Live. We have loved welcoming you in as Impactologists, because you absolutely are. The work that you are doing is amazing, and we wish you every single luck and good fortune and all the good things that can come from the documentary. We look forward to seeing how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the beautiful work that you're doing. That's been very courageous, and thanks for having us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you. So next on Impactology Live, we're back in just over 10 minutes, and we have Peter Parthamos, who is the CEO and founder of Futsal Oz. Peter will be joining us live here in the studio. See you soon.